Yo, what's up? My name is James,
And I'm Mitch,
and we'll be making a tier list of these four revolutions.
starting with French,
Then Russian, Chinese,
and lastly, Iranian. First up on the chopping block, we have the French Revolution, which happens first chronologically in the timeline. Now, first, it is important to understand why the people created a revolution in the first place. The old Ancien regime had three levels of social hierarchy, or what they called the estates. The first estate was the clergy, who had a huge amount of political power in France and didn't have to pay any taxes whatsoever. The second estate was the nobility, who also had a large amount of political power. And finally, the third estate consisted of the peasants and the bourgeoisie, who had little to no rights and had to pay the most taxes, even though they hardly had any income. In terms of leadership, France had a monarchy, with King Louis XVI in power. King Louis was not seen as a good leader, with many thinking he was extremely indecisive and incompetent in terms of his ruling. France was in about 4 billion livres in debt, which only made people's resentment of the ruling class grow. On May 5th, 1789, representatives for the three states met in Versailles to try and solve this financial crisis. However, the Third Estate had no say in any matters. Because of this, on June 17th, 1789, the Third Estate revolted and created what is now known as the National Assembly. They would have their own say in political matters, and this was the first spark in creating a revolution. Now, another important factor in the French Revolution were the Jacobins, who were a radical group of revolutionaries. The Jacobins Club was created in June of 1789, and they really wanted the death of the monarchy and to create a new regime in their image. Soon, a charismatic man by the name of Maximilien Robespierre would become leader of the Jacobins. Robespierre pushed strongly for the death of King Louis XVI, which eventually happened on January 21st, 1793. People were hungry for change, bloodthirsty with vengeance, homes were filled with screams, and streets were filled with blood. The purpose and meaning of the revolution were lost as people degraded themselves to animalistic instincts. Eventually, Robespierre became so fanatical that the Reign of Terror occurred, which caused many people who were originally for the revolution to realize that things were going too far. The French Revolution became the very thing it set out to stop, if not worse, and a total of around 17,000 people, most of which were innocent, were executed. Now, with everything we know about the French Revolution, we'll have to give it C tier. Nothing was truly achieved for the people or country of France in this time, and in fact, it became worse, with countless deaths and economic problems.
Now it's time for the second revolution in chronological order, the Russian Revolution. Okay, let's get some background stuff out of the way. So the year is 1894, and the Tsar of Russia, Alexander III, is real sick and dies from kidney failure. So his eldest son, Nicholas II, abruptly comes to power. The thing is, Tsar Nicholas was at a super awkward age to become Tsar. He was 26 when his dad died, so he wasn't young enough to be considered a boy king, nor was he old enough to where he could confidently run the country on his own. And this aspect of him definitely showed in his career as leader. He racked up quite a lot of defeats and embarrassing events for Russia. To name a couple, Bloody Sunday happened, where hundreds of lives were lost due to a miscommunication, and the whole thing with Rasputin happened, and he got owned in the Russo-Japanese War by the underdog Japan, who had just started to industrialize, and later also got owned by Germany in World War One, in which Tsar Nicholas made a foolish decision to lead in being the head of military. All this added up to the people having enough of poor Nick, and basically in February 1917, everyone gathered in Petrograd, which is now St. Petersburg, and pretty much forced Tsar Nicholas II to abdicate, and he did. At the time of the February Revolution, our boy Vladimir Lenin was doing side quests in Switzerland, and when he heard the news, a sealed train was arranged for him to go through Germany and up across Sweden and Finland and back into Russia. He had arrived in April, and from that point, he led the Bolshevik side to glory against the provisional government, which was led by the former ministers of Tsar Nicholas. After Lenin's success during the October Revolution, he overthrew the provisional government and established the first Marxist state, the Soviet Union. This revolution is fairly hard to rank, considering what the country did in its 69 years it existed. Joseph Stalin, a Soviet dictator, was absolutely nuts and is responsible for countless atrocities that he committed, but they were super intimidating, and the Cold War is a result. So I would put this revolution in S tier if it weren't for the USSR's dissolution in 1991, because as we know, the Soviet Union doesn't exist today. The great fall off of the USSR was pretty bad because they lost a quarter of their land and were separated into 15 independent states. The Soviet Union at one point was so big that you could drive from within the Arctic Circle all the way down to Afghanistan and never go out the country. But now that's not really the case. So I'll have to give the Russian Revolution an A tier on our list. Next up is the Chinese Revolution. The leader of the Chinese government before the revolution was Chiang Kai shek. He led the country from 1929 to 1943. During this time, there was a war between China and Japan called the Second Sino-Japanese War. The conflict was a complete failure on China's part, and many blamed Shek for this. After the World War II, there was an extreme inflation, poverty, and food shortages, which were making the people's lives harder. During this time, Mao Zedong was an important member of the Communists, and after a long march, he was seen as the leader of the Communists. The Communists were forced to team up with Shek's army to fight off the Japanese. However, casualties were heavy. Fast forward to the year 1946, which is after World War II, and a civil war breaks out in China between Shek's army and the Communists. With the US support, the Communists were able to capture Yan'an. Eventually, due to some decisive victories, Mao was able to force Shek to flee to Taiwan in 1949. Mao was then able to establish himself as leader. Mao Zedong, the leader of the Communist Party of China, didn't look back. From 1958 to 1962, this Great Leap Forward was an attempt to industrialize the country to one-up and appear more intimidating to the Western powers. China wanted to be a superpower, and to do that, Mao had a big cult following called the Red Guard. Mao Zedong implemented communes, which were farming communities that had soldiers present, although they produced poor quality steel to industrialize quickly. Not even kitchen utensils were spared in the process. During these 3 years, 36 million people died due to harsh conditions and famines. Fast forward to 1966, Mao is losing power and getting old. And sort of a last attempt to gain popularity, he swam across the river Yangtze. Newspapers spread misinformation about how fast Mao swam, claiming he had a new world record. That definitely deducts a tier from the Chinese Revolution. In present day, the CCP is still going strong, and though it may seem surprising, Mao Zedong is celebrated as somewhat of an important leader in Chinese history. We'll give this revolution a C tier for its mass casualties when compared to the results of Mao's industrialization.
Finally, we have the most recent revolution, which is the Iranian Revolution. Before the revolution occurred, Iran was ruled by the Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. The reason why the people in Iran despised the Shah was due to the fact that they believed he was a puppet for the Western world. Around this time, countries like America and Britain were trying to politically take control of Iran in order to obtain the large amounts of oil that Iran had to offer geographically. It wasn't long before the Shah became very sick, and America was forced to take him in and treat him on January 16th, 1979. The people saw this as an act of betrayal, and one man in particular saw this as an opportunity to have the people create the revolution they always wanted. This man's name was Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. The Ayatollah was able to establish himself as the leader of the revolution after 15 years in exile on February 1st, 1979. The Ayatollah and his group of clerics and advisors, the mullahs, were now in complete control of Iran. One important thing to note is that the Shah was never executed and was able to travel to other countries such as Egypt, Morocco, and Mexico. In 1980, Saddam Hussein, who was the leader of Iraq, saw the political instability in Iran and invaded it on September 22nd, 1980, hoping to obtain more power as well as stop the revolution from potentially spreading anywhere else. An 8-year war ensued, which left over 1 million dead and wounded as well as economic devastation. This new regime sets women's rights and liberties back and forced them to become second-rate citizens within their own country, community, and family. Thousands of people were also imprisoned, exiled, or executed around this time, and it could be for the smallest offenses, such as talking bad about the government um, or wearing a hijab too high. Something else that is extremely important to mention is that the revolution is still around today and has never collapsed. As of now, in the year 2025, there is a widespread detestation of the government with many protests and strikes. There are huge economic and social problems with serious energy problems, social repression, and economic collapse. After a 12-day war with Israel in July 2025, Iran also now has an extremely weakened military and no anti air defenses. Now it's time to rank the Iranian Revolution, and I would have to give it a B tier. This is because while it has been successful in the sense that it is around today, people in Iran have no rights or freedoms, which makes it just as bad as it was pre revolution, if not worse.
So there we go. There's the final tier list of these 4 revolutions.
I hope you learned quite a bit from our video and benefit from the information that was shared.
Thank you for watching and have a good day.